A warm welcome, everybody. We're so pleased that you can join us today from around the world for this webinar, for this Launchpad event. We are, of course, a part of this amazing lineup of events hosted by the Global Landscapes Forum these past 2 days to discuss and to highlight the importance of dryland ecosystems, but joined as well by the many partners who are contributing to building the momentum that is generation restoration in celebration and in anticipation of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. Now, although we do have to wait a few more days until June 5th, until the official launch, today we are pleased to be sharing and launching some innovative tools and platforms in support of the decade to come. Tools which we hope will be catalytic in monitoring the progress of the decade, its contribution to the climate and biodiversity agendas, and overall to better understand how humanity is progressing towards helping the 3.2 billion people who are affected by and living amongst the world's most degraded landscapes. So today we will be hearing some feedback from country colleagues as to how these tools can move from the cloud to the ground and be truly impactful for restoration stakeholders on the front lines. My name is Khalil Walji from FAO, and I'm thrilled and am honored to be moderating today's session. And I am being helped by many colleagues who are supporting us through the HOVA app. So we encourage you to introduce yourself, pose your questions in the Q&A box, and explore the links that are shared through the chat. I will also take a moment to remind colleagues that there should be simultaneous translation in French and English, so please do take advantage of that service. Now, to get us started, I would like to welcome Ms. Mette Wilkie, who's the director of the FAO Forestry Division, but I think she might be running a little bit late, coming from another meeting. So instead, I actually have the pleasure to introduce Julian Fox to kick us off with our first Launchpad segment. Julian is the coordinator. Julian is the team leader at FAO's National Forest Monitoring Team and also serves as the coordinator of the Task Force on Monitoring. And he'll be joined as well by Fida Haddad, who's the Drylands Forestry Officer at FAO. Julian will first present the framework for ecosystem restoration monitoring, fondly known as the FERM, and followed by Fida, who will present on the integration of the Drylands Restoration Initiatives platform. These are two complementary tools which will be integrated to support restoration monitoring throughout the decade, and in this case, specifically in dryland ecosystems. Julian and Fida, I turn the floor over to you guys.
Thanks so much, Khalil. Yeah, I have the honor of kicking off the session. Let me just reorient my screens for a moment. Okay, there we go. Okay, dear colleagues, I'm really humbled to be able to launch the Framework for Ecosystem Restoration Monitoring today, known within our closed circles as the FERM, and we hope now that acronym becomes more widely adopted in the restoration community. And it's really exciting that it integrates the Drylands Restoration Initiative platform, which was specifically developed for monitoring the restoration of drylands, which of course is the focus of GLF Africa. Next slide, please. So the Task Force on Monitoring was established 15 months ago, it seems like only yesterday, by the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. FAO was asked to lead the task force to develop a monitoring framework with indicators, guidance, and case studies as a key technical pillar to the UN Decade. The expected outputs were the Framework for Ecosystem Restoration Monitoring, for decade reporting, but also for restoration stakeholders. The development of technical solutions with training material for monitoring, several of which we launched today for restoration planning and monitoring, as well as country pilots and case studies, again, some of which will be presented today with a view to scaling up activities through the decade. And finally, a key output was the FERM geospatial platform for data access and transparency that we are launching today. Next slide, please. So the vision of the Task Force on Monitoring is that a science-based restoration movement should be informed by the best available technology and data for planning and monitoring restoration actions on the ground, and that the latest innovations should be broadly accessible to restoration stakeholders. This can help turn commitments into actions and can help scale investments in restoration. Sound restoration monitoring at the local level can help catalyze and scale investments in the successes, but also enable adaptive management when restoration actions are not going as planned. In the spirit of the UN Decade, we have seen a real willingness to collaborate on this task with a shared vision, which has been wonderful, with contributions from over 270 experts across more than 100 organizations. We established 3 very active sub-task forces to ensure that we could track restoration progress through the decade for all ecosystems, terrestrial and aquatic, and covering both biophysical and socioeconomic elements. We have regular task force and sub-task force meetings to collectively and collaboratively move forward on our tasks. And you can find links to all the meetings, decision points, and work plans in our task force summary note. The overarching output was the FERM, which we are launching today. And also to note that we collaborate very closely with the second FAO-led task force for best practices. Next slide, please. Perfect. So the FERM is based on FAO's corporate hand-in-hand geospatial architecture. Users can explore geospatial information related to soil, water, vegetation, and socioeconomics for their ecosystem of interest. Users can access tools and guidance for restoration planning and monitoring, some of which will be presented today. Users can upload and integrate their own data locally, nationally, regionally in their own private workspaces. Users can also create and share compelling restoration impact stories based on their own data for their defined area of interest. And finally, users can apply advanced functionality with the integration of FAO's cloud computing platform, CEPAL, which is also mobile compatible. In a moment, we have a brief demo of the platform, but I encourage you to visit the platform, explore its functionality, see how it can help you do your restoration monitoring. And we've also created a user guide with step-by-step instructions. Next slide, please. In parallel to the FERM platform, we are developing the FERM registry for recording geospatial information on restoration projects. When operational, users will be able to visualize and disseminate geospatial data for projects through the FERM platform. A key need for the FERM registry is its ability to integrate and be interoperable with other restoration platforms, such as the DRIP, developed specifically for drylands. My colleague Fida will present this integration in a moment. And this integration is critical. So restoration stakeholders, governments, investors can be assured that whichever monitoring platform they use, high geospatial standards are maintained that allow data to be interoperable. We do not want stakeholders to have to enter their data into multiple platforms. I would like to emphasize the shared vision among platform developers toward interoperability, and we'll share a link to a media article published today on this collaboration between key organizations supporting restoration and its monitoring, such as the World Economic Forum and its 1 Trillion Trees campaign, World Resources Institute, Climate Focus, IUCN, Restore, and Tentree. Our shared vision is to collectively catalyze investment in restoration through collaborative and transparent monitoring. The launch of the FERM today is just the start, the beginning of a collaborative journey through the Task Force for Monitoring to make sure data, technology, and innovation catalyzes restoration actions on the ground to strengthen partnerships in the restoration monitoring community. The FERM platform we are launching today provides a workbench for us to collaborate across institutions, across platforms, seeking synergies between initiatives, avoiding duplication of effort, and moving forward together. And we are making great progress on this. And thanks to all task force members for the support and collaboration. You are very welcome to join this effort and contribute, and the email address is at the bottom. Thank you very much for your support. Time for a brief demo of the platform. Thank you, Khalil.
Let's take a brief tour of the framework for Ecosystem Restoration Monitoring, or FERM platform, which is accessible through the website data.apps.fao.org/FERM. The FERM is a geospatial platform that improves data access and transparency to provide key resources on ecosystem restoration and is made available to anyone curious to find out more about restoration. The interface might look familiar as it is built on FAO's corporate hand-in-hand geospatial architecture. Let's start by exploring by clicking Explore Data. The data is grouped by ecosystem typology used by the UN Decade. Key ecosystems include grasslands, shrublands, and savannas, peatlands, mountains, farmlands, oceans and coasts, freshwater, forests, drylands, and urban areas. The Tools tab provides access to additional tools and platforms for restoration planning and monitoring with linkages to advanced monitoring functionality from the CEPAL platform. Within each ecosystem, data is grouped by biophysical properties, socioeconomic data sources, geospatial data related to management such as fish catch areas, global indicators, and good practices for restoring each ecosystem. The FERM is being actively populated, so keep an eye out for updates and new data layers. Now let's take a look at an example of forest restoration. First, let's add our own data on a restoration site. Data uploaded through this functionality is private and is not shared on the platform. I'm dragging the file here to upload it to the platform. It shows the boundaries for a central forest reserve in Uganda where restoration is actively ongoing. Let's capture this larger area that we can later share in a story. Let's name this Forest Reserve. In the Forest tab, we can see the data available for vegetation. Some of the data includes the Global Forest Resource Assessment, which collects country-reported statistics on forest area and forest area change. More information can be found on this right-hand side. Additional data that's available includes a time series of high-resolution satellite imagery from Planet Labs that's now publicly available thanks to a generous donation from the Norwegian government. Let's load a satellite image from 2017 and another one from 2020 to visualize changes over time. Let's zoom into an area. And enable the split screen and put the 2020 image on the right-hand side and the 2017 on the left. Here we can slide between the two different images and see if there's been any restoration progress. Let's capture this in our stories. This is the image 2017, the degraded forest. You can see these degraded areas here. And in 2020, we see some restoration progress. Let's capture that, 2020 restoration progress. Save. The same tools can also be used to monitor and combat ecosystem degradation and deforestation, which is essential for meeting the goals of ecosystem restoration in the UN decade. We can now share this story by generating a URL by clicking on share and copying this URL. We can paste this URL into a new tab to see that story. Accept that story, and we see the larger area, the forest reserve in Uganda, the 2017 degraded area, improvements in 2020. And I've also added an additional data source here. This is the FRA data that's reported on naturally regenerating forests in Algeria. And you can see the time series here of how the forest area for naturally regenerating forests has changed over time at the national scale. That's all the time that we have for today, but there are many applications for a variety of ecosystems in the FERM. We encourage you to check out the FERM for yourself and keep in mind that it's being actively developed. If you have any suggestions for functionality or data sets that you'd like to see, you can click on the Give Feedback button and fill out this form. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Khalil. Thank you, Julian. I want to complement what Julian just mentioned and highlighted on the importance of ecosystem restoration and importance of ecosystem monitoring. But what if this ecosystem is the most vulnerable one, and the impact of climate change is twice of the global warming And at the same time, this ecosystem is providing 60% of the world food production. And as a response to the UN decade, so the new DREP is aimed to monitor the, it's a part of FERM, aimed to monitor the land degradation neutrality status, support the countries, and the most important is the synergies, as Julian mentioned, with other platforms. So the idea is to avoid duplication and to support users, decision makers in producing their or support their understanding on monitoring purposes. So DREP is aimed to advance the dryland restoration monitoring systems, advancing the monitoring efforts of drylands, where different users will be able to use this system. So basically, we are aiming to support the practitioners and decision makers to understand their baseline, and voluntary, it will be voluntary use by different stakeholders, mainly the Land Degradation Committee working group, to support them understanding their progress and their situation in terms of providing support to the decision makers, also to document lessons learned, and with special focus on the understanding of different transformative projects and programs related to the gender responsive. And there will be an option to support the donors by informing them how many projects are supporting the land degradation neutrality target. Where are these projects and how we can invest more, with more attention to the how researchers also can use this platform to do further analysis on the way to implement land degradation neutrality on the ground. Now, as we mentioned, FERM and DREP is now using the same registry, so users don't need to enter different platforms. So basically, as Julian presented, the ecosystem restoration monitoring has a registry platform where you need to follow the 8 steps. Under the 8 steps, where you can find the DREP platform, which is more about providing further analysis, more to link the cloud mentioned by or having through FERM into more ground information. So DREP has 3 stages of data to be analyzed: at the inception planning stage, at the monitoring and implementation stage, which is the midterm of any project implementation, and at the end of the project. So basically, the user will be able to understand more information about the site description, landscape activities, different governance structure, the way of project activities distributed between different land uses, landscapes, and how to do the monitoring of that purposes. So basically, we are aiming to have at inception planning stage, users will be able to define their baseline, which is related to the land degradation neutrality indicators, what we call it a T0 stage. And that will be exported by a FERM platform. So they will be able to have the map of their different land uses and the status of their degradation. At the second stage, which is once the project started and has some implementation on the ground, users will be able to update their information and update their progress toward land degradation indicators, plus having more information where are the improvements and where are the key hotspots that still they need to emphasize and update their planning project activity to improve their restoration initiatives. And at the project, at the end of the project, also users will be able to update their information, but have further socio-economic and more analysis on why they had gain or loss in related to the land degradation neutrality target in terms of between their T0 and T9 information. So now we are in the testing stage where we have 25 countries are voluntarily joined this initiative of FERM and the DREP integration. And so far we did the consultation and updated this registry platform. And now we are, as I said, testing it on 25 countries. So I hope that you will hear now from Zimbabwe, one of the countries pioneer in this testing, and design the updated platform. So basically, we are aiming to have this platform access to anybody committed to do restoration, linking the cloud with the ground, and it's a way to think outside the box and start to understand what are the activities on the ground that help to improve the restoration. For this, I hand over to you, Khalil, and thank you for helping this ecosystem to be restored again.
Fantastic. Many thanks to both Julian and to Fida for two interesting presentations and providing a nice overview of both the FERM and the DRIP platform and walking us through some of the key functions that are currently available, as well as the functions that are in the pipeline and which will be complementary to support data sharing and to better support restoration monitoring and outcomes. And now, one thing that was clear from both presentations is that the FERM and the DRIP are still in the developmental phase, which means that there's still plenty of opportunity to be shaped by the users. So colleagues, in the chat box, our colleagues have put the FERM user guide and feedback survey, and these are critical. We really want to hear from your perspectives. We want to hear and gather your insight into what the challenges that you face when it comes to monitoring restoration, and how the FERM and the DRIP can support your work. We would like to capture your efforts, and really we would like you to help us get the most vivid picture of all of the ecosystem restoration work that is going on, from the smallest to the largest areas of land and sea, which are being brought back to vibrant and thriving ecosystems. Now, I see that we are joined by Ms. Mete Wilkie, the Director of FAO's Forestry Division, and one of two focal points at FAO for the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. Mete was at a press briefing, so we did have to start without her, but a very warm welcome, Mete. I'm happy to turn the floor over to you to help us continue to set the scene and to provide us with some opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Khalil. And good afternoon, good morning to everybody, wherever you are. I hope you can see me. I can't start my video from this end, so if somebody would help doing that, that might be useful. I am sorry I am late for this. As Khalil was saying, I had a press briefing with the press corps in Geneva that just finished, and it's very important for us, of course, to make sure that we have the press on board, that they can help us create that awareness that we need in order to establish that global movement, which is one of the key goals of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. I'm very pleased to be with you here today, and particularly to look at what we're doing in terms of monitoring progress, because we know that there are some very important commitments already. There are some pledges to do ecosystem restoration, particularly on the land side. We still need them on the ocean side. But we wanted very early on to make sure that we also could report on what progress has been made at the end of the decade. Is the decade a success? How are we meeting the goals that we've set ourselves? So to do that, we set up a small monitoring task force, and we started out within the Forestry Division in FAO because they've been doing monitoring of forest and land use changes for years. But we told them that we didn't just want to do that. We also wanted to look at oceans and coasts, and we didn't want to just look at the biophysical aspect. We also wanted to use the opportunity to look at what the progress in sort of socioeconomic benefits that are coming out from restoration. So it was quite a big task that we set them up to do. And as we just heard, we wanted to do from small scale to very large scale. But little did we know that when we asked them to do that and build on existing effort, this would morph into a movement in itself. We have more than 270 people from 100 different organizations involved in setting up this framework, so that we are sure that we build on the expertise that's already there. We build on the reporting that's already there, on the tools and approaches that are already there. So you've already heard a bit about them, and we are really pleased to see the progress that has been made so far. when you talk about a group of 270 people and trying to coordinate it, it's a bit like herding cats. So I'm very pleased that one of the first tasks that they did was to set themselves a common vision and a goal for how to move forward. And we've been very, very pleased with the progress that has been made so far. So I'd really encourage you to take part in it. If you have questions, put them in the chat or ask them at the end of the session. If you have experience in monitoring that you want to share, then please also get in touch with us or with some of the experts that you will see here on the presentations here today. So I won't take much of your time since I'm late. I'll just let you get on with it and listen in, and hope to engage with all of you during the session and afterwards. So thank you very much for the invitation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mette, for those opening remarks. And even if late, we always appreciate your presence at these sessions. Thank you also for highlighting some of the pivotal roles that monitoring has to play for the overall decade. Pivotal in attracting further investment, for increasing transparency, and as you mentioned, for continuing to build that sort of public narrative around the importance of ecosystem restoration and to build that momentum. I'd like to return to our previous train of thought, which was in regards to the testing phase of both the FERM and the DRIP. The DRIP, as discussed by FIDE, is also in a testing phase and is being tested by 25 countries. And so we are thrilled today to be joined by our colleague from Zimbabwe. So for the next presentation, I'd like to turn the floor to Mr. Barnabas Mawire from FAO's Sub-Regional Office for Southern Africa. Barnabas and colleagues have had the opportunity to test and implement the FERM and DRIP, and will be sharing reflections and lessons learned of the early piloting of the tools in Zimbabwe, which is a low rainfall country with areas that are prone to land degradation. So Barnabas, a very warm welcome to you and a big thanks for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you, colleagues. We are delighted to be part of this team that is trying out this DRIP platform and the tools that are being developed. We are a landlocked country, as you heard. Next slide, please. We are a landlocked country in Southern Africa, which is prone to climate change-induced extreme weather events, such as droughts, floods, and this also exposes the country to land degradation. Main land uses in Zimbabwe include communal areas, agricultural land, protected areas, and settlements. Of interest are communal lands, which make up 42% of the land area, where 67% of the population live. And this 67% of the population is made up of mainly peasant farmers, those who are working on the land, those who derive livelihoods from working on the land. And the main drivers for degradation include clearing of lands for agriculture, where fields are expanding, and also for road construction, for settlements, and also mining is a big driver of land degradation because large and small scale mines are also expanding. And also there's population pressure. The population is also growing in those areas, which are dry, of course. And droughts and floods are also exacerbating the problem, especially when we look at veld fires or forest fires, because during drylands, these forest fires are chewing a lot of land, and this is causing degradation. And also poor land management practices. Next slide, please. As you can see, Zimbabwe has got its land degradation neutrality targets set, and these are at the level, at national levels and also at specific levels. And as you can see, restoration initiatives in areas of reforestation, use of conservation farming and agroforestry, and also catchment area reclamation, and also in the areas of energy. The greater part of the population of Zimbabwe, they over-rely on biomass to meet energy needs for both domestic use and also for curing tobacco. So there are also some restoration initiatives in trying to promote renewable energy technologies so as to try and reduce this over-dependence. And of course, also there's an area of policy where also there's enforcement of certain conservation works as well. So next slide, please. As alluded to by my colleague earlier, we are one of the countries that is trying to test this DRIP platform. And so far, we are very happy to share with you what our experience has been. We have been experiencing some challenges, and these are related to the fact that we are at the beginning of implementation of monitoring systems. Our focal point for UNCCD is the Environmental Management Agency, who are currently still setting up their M&E system. And you will find out that most of the institutions that are involved in initiatives which are trying to deal with land degradation neutrality, that is in the areas of environment, agriculture, and energy, they don't have a robust M&E system. And this is quite a big challenge for us in tracking LDN projects which are contributing to reducing land degradation. And also, even our civil society colleagues whom we are working with, they also have challenges in terms of developing effective and robust M&E systems. So you can see that capturing of contributions coming from projects is still problematic for us. And we are happy with the development of platforms such as the DRIP. We are seeing light at the end of the tunnel. Next slide, please. We have tried to test DRIP in 2 project areas. The first one is our DSL project, which was launched yesterday under the GF7 initiative. And this is to the right of, to the left on the slides, which you can see it's in southern Zimbabwe. We have tested the DRIP on a project that is starting. We have used the platform and tools in setting the baseline, in identifying the areas that will be rehabilitated. And this has worked well, especially during stakeholder engagement. And it has also helped to transparently discuss and set the stage for the project we will be implementing for the next 6 years. We have also tested the platform on a project that has been implemented since 2015. And this also is a GEF-funded initiative in northwestern Zimbabwe in an area called the Wange-Sanyat Biological Corridor area. Next slide, please. In this project, we tested the platform on the data that has been generated on a project that has been implemented, and some of the activities continue to be implemented today by our colleagues from the Forestry Commission of Zimbabwe. So testing this platform is actually indicated to us that indeed this platform can work, but we are trying to refine some of its parts so that it meets the needs of our government, the actors, and other stakeholders. I'm happy to share with you that an evaluation has shown us that one of the activities which was implemented in that project, focusing on improved fire management of 2 gazetted forests, has shown a decrease actually in the number of fires occurring in the area, and also a decrease in the area burned. And next slide, please. That downward trend on areas burned is also indicating, areas which are showing recoveries, and also areas that have been restored during implementation of that project. So we hope this will continue to be useful to us, and we are very happy to be one of the pioneers in testing this platform. Thank you very much. Next slide, please. You can see the results we are seeing from our pilot test, and we are happy. And it's an indication that indeed this can help us, because one of the challenges we are facing here in the South is that we didn't have, access to these open remote sensing sources. So we hope this platform will be accessible, as alluded to earlier on, and it will help us in improving our monitoring system and consequently reporting on LDN targets set for the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barnabas, for those key reflections and for the lessons learned from Zimbabwe and your insightful presentation. It's wonderful to hear already how the DRIP is being used on the ground and how that will help shape its future developments, and to hear how it can continue to support reporting against international commitments, and specifically in this case towards monitoring progress towards the LDN targets. Now, colleagues, shortly I would like to turn the floor over to a new group of colleagues for the second Launchpad segment of our session. I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce Yelena Feingold, FAO Forestry Officer, who will first present on technology and innovation for restoration monitoring, followed by Jeffrey Vincent and Karis Tennyson. Jeff is a professor of forest economics and management at Duke University, and Karis is the director of environmental mapping at the Spatial Informatics Group. Jeff, Karis, and Yelena, along with other collaborators, have been developing and testing a new restoration planning tool, which is just about ready to launch. So we're excited to hear from them about the integration of new socioeconomic layers and the improved functionality of this new planning tool. And this is just a snapshot. Of a full launch, I believe, will be taking place in a few weeks' time, and they can share more information on that. With that, I'd like to pass the floor to Yelena. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Khalil. And what an exciting week, really, building up to World Environment Day and the launch of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. I'll be presenting on how tools and innovation can be used to monitor restoration in different ecosystems, highlighting the progress of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration Monitoring Task Force, and showing examples of restoration monitoring. Next slide, please. How we monitor ecosystem restoration can really differ according to the ecosystem type, scale, time frame, and objective of the restoration activities, and other factors. The multidimensionality of the monitoring needs means there's no one tool or data set that suits all restoration projects. We need a variety of monitoring methods, including on-the-ground data collection, citizen science, and sensor data, such as satellite data. These data should measure not only the biophysical progress of restoration, but also on the effect on communities and livelihood, just as Mette mentioned in her intervention. Next slide, please. As Julian described, the monitoring task force is split into 3 subgroups on terrestrial, aquatic, and socioeconomic monitoring. There are many ongoing and long-standing efforts to monitor restoration, and the task force is focused on building on existing frameworks, indicators, and data collection efforts to find synergies and avoid duplication. The Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, are key indicators for monitoring and reporting progress on this UN decade, and indicators from other frameworks will be complementary to the SDGs. In order to provide resources on how to monitor these indicators, the monitoring task force is mapping available tools and platforms, which will then be distributed through the FERM. Next slide, please. The UN Decade will monitor how restoration improves the SDGs. One example is SDG 15, Life on Land, one of the key goals for the UN Decade. Reduction in the proportion of degraded land, which is the indicator SDG 15.3.1, which also Barnabas gave some really nice examples in his presentation on monitoring this SDG. And this SDG can really be monitored at both global and project scales. Clear guidance documents like the good practice guidance and easy to use tools developed by UNCCD and the GeoLDN collaborators enable monitoring using this SDG indicator. Through the UN Decade, we are working on integrating workflows that produce locally relevant data for SDG indicators by connecting tools like Trends Earth, CEPOL, and Open Forest Collector. Next slide, please. In Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh, this SDG indicator 15.3.1 is being used to monitor the progress of forest restoration and land stabilization projects in and around refugee camps. Cox's Bazar hosts the world's largest refugee camp, where over 1 million Rohingya people have fled to in the span of a few years. The huge influx of population has increased the demand for land and natural resources. And in the pictures on the slide, we see an area that was converted to informal settlements that were built on the slopes of this area where forest was once growing. Without trees to stabilize the land, there is a huge risk of landslides. To protect the vulnerable population, the refugees were resettled to safer settlements nearby, and the area was reforested using terracing to reduce the risk of deadly landslides. Baseline information shows previous degradation and then subsequent decrease in this degradation after the restoration activities, as we can see here in the chart, where once the restoration is implemented, the degradation is going down. Tools like Trends Earth integrate customized data such as national land cover maps, and through CEPOL's SDG indicator tools, finer resolution imagery from Landsat and Sentinel provide results at scales relevant for small to large scale restoration projects. Next slide, please. This is an example of monitoring assisted natural regeneration of forests in Colombia using high resolution imagery, which is available from Planet Labs NICFI data, where we can visually observe a severely degraded forest from the first image in 2010. As time progresses, we can see an increase in the forest cover. We can quantify those changes for monitoring through powerful cloud computing platforms like CEPOL that can analyze huge amounts of satellite data over time and detect changes in vegetation cover. Longer time series of satellite data, like those from NASA's Landsat program, provide baseline data to further quantify and report these changes. And from this chart here, we can clearly see after the revegetation has been implemented just a few years later, we can see a really steep increase in the vegetation index from the satellite imagery analysis. Next slide, please. In dryland ecosystems, tools on the ground, such as specialized plows, are being used for land preparation to restore the degraded land and encourage natural regeneration. Using satellite data, the restoration sites can be monitored and the planted areas can be mapped by observing the microbasins from high resolution imagery. Radar data from the European Space Agency's Sentinel-1 satellite are used to automatically detect the preparation areas, which are highlighted in blue in the image. And actually, those are detected by the satellite itself. This method is used to accurately map the intervention areas and has been used in projects across the Great Green Wall in Burkina Faso, Niger, Nigeria, and Senegal. Accurate boundaries of restoration sites are key to monitoring and ensuring restoration success in those areas. Next slide, please. This last example focuses on peatlands, a transitional ecosystem between terrestrial and aquatic systems. Peatlands are one of the world's largest natural carbon stores. Degraded peatlands can release this carbon into the atmosphere and can switch from being a carbon sink to a carbon source. In peatlands with agricultural activities, canals are often used to drain the peatlands. In order to restore the peatlands, the canals are blocked to re-wet the areas. In Indonesia, peatland monitoring is a priority, and tools on the ground include ground sensors that collect soil moisture and groundwater level data. This ground data is combined with Sentinel-1 radar satellite imagery in the CEPOL platform to model the groundwater levels for the entire peatland hydrological unit. Monitoring at the landscape level shows the progress of re-wetting in the peatlands. Next slide, please. So this was just a taste of some of the monitoring applications that are possible with new tools and technology enabled by data sharing in the FERM platform and easy to use tools that are available through CEPOL. It's really honestly never been easier to monitor and transparently share data. And this UN decade aims to be at the forefront of new technology, as well as innovative community-oriented solutions through a participatory effort that mobilizes many actors to identify indicators, tools, and data for monitoring the restoration of ecosystems. We're working on identifying gaps and provide opportunities to integrate tools and methods for monitoring. And we invite all to participate as we embark on the next 10 years of this UN decade. Thank you so much. That's all for my presentation. And I'll turn the floor over to Jeff Vincent from Duke University and Karis Tennyson, who from Spatial Informatics Group, who are going to present on a new tool that we've been developing together on forest restoration planning that's focused on integrating socioeconomic data. So over to you, Jeff and Karis.
Thanks, Yelena. Could I have the first slide, please? Well, it's my pleasure to introduce to you CPlan, which is a spatially explicit forest restoration planning tool. I emphasize that this is a planning tool, so we're shifting gears from discussing monitoring to discussing planning. It's on FAO's Open Forest CEPOL platform. That's one reason for the SE at the start of the name. And being on this platform means that it's available to all users, at least all who have a Google Earth Engine account. Next, please. As Yelena has mentioned, this tool emphasizes socioeconomics. It integrates socioeconomics with biophysical information. And the inclusion of socioeconomics is another reason for the SE in the name. And by socioeconomics, we mean that this tool incorporates information on the benefits, costs, and risks of forest restoration. And incorporating socioeconomics is important because the land that's available for forest restoration is typically being used by somebody. And restoration is more likely to succeed and be sustained if it makes land users better off. Next, please. The tool focuses on 139 low and middle income countries, which are shown in this map. These are countries where land degradation is often the most severe and where information on forest restoration options is most lacking. Next. The tool identifies potential restoration sites in the following manner. First, it begins with information on potential tree cover. This is drawn from a previous FAO-supported study published in Science a couple of years ago by Bastien et al. So this layer indicates locations where it's possible for trees to grow on the Earth's surface. Next. Then the tool removes from that layer of potential restoration or potential areas where trees can grow the sites where the actual amount of tree cover, the existing amount of tree cover, is equal to the potential. So these would be areas where it's not possible to have more forest cover. So we take those sites out. So we're now left with a set of sites where forests can grow, but they're currently not at their potential level of tree cover. Next, please. And then as a final step, we remove urban areas under the assumption that it's not going to be possible to restore significant amounts of tree cover there. And so this tool is focused on forest restoration in rural areas. Next. Let me discuss key features of the tool. First has to do with user input. Users select their area of interest, a country, a group of countries, or regions within a country. They also rate restoration benefits. And so the output of the tool is going to depend on the benefits that users select. And there are 4 categories of benefits that users can select and rate: local livelihoods, wood production, biodiversity conservation, and carbon sequestration. So users indicate how much these different benefits matter to them. And then users can also apply constraints that relate to different ecological and socioeconomic risks. And I'll show you a list of those constraints in a moment. The output generated by the tool includes maps, charts, and numerical values. Very importantly, the tool generates a restoration suitability index, which is an easily understood index on a scale of 1 to 5. It's interpretable as a relative benefit cost ratio for each grid cell in the tool. And so it's indicating the suitability of restoration in different locations. It accounts for the benefits of restoration, and those benefits are going to take into account the weights that users have indicated through their rating of those 4 categories of benefits. And it also accounts for the costs of restoration, which are defined as the sum of the opportunity cost of the land, that is the value of the land in its use other than forest restoration, and also the cost of establishing forest on that land. Next, please. Here's a list of the constraints that users can apply. These pertain to different ecological and socioeconomic risks. I'll mention just one example. In that first column, biophysical, you'll see the 4th entry is terrestrial ecoregion. If, for example, the natural vegetation in an area would be a grassland, and a user prefers not to restore forests in that type of area, then natural grasslands could be masked out and not included in the solution space for the tool. Next, please.
The destruction of forests hurt people and the planet, while restoring these landscapes offer profound benefits: storing carbon, improving biodiversity, purifying water and air, buffering against floods and extreme weather, and providing people with food and other resources. The restoration of degraded forests presents an unprecedented opportunity to improve the lives and livelihoods of people around the world. A new planning tool from the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations helps countries and restoration actors grasp that opportunity. The tool is adaptive, customizable, and open source.
The restoration planning module will be integrated inside the CEPAL dashboard as an application. This application will look like a website and will be separated into 4 computation steps and 2 result steps. In the first step, you'll be asked to select an area of interest for your study that will be used inside the module. 2 possible options are available. The first is to use administrative layers, and the second is to use custom geometries. Once the boundary is selected, you can move to the questionnaire. The questionnaire is split into 2 steps: constraints and restoration priorities. Constraints are a set of criteria that can be activated or deactivated by selecting them inside the drop-down menu. Some constraints allow to mask a range of values, while others are binary. The restoration priorities can be selected using a standard priority questionnaire, which allows you to rank your priorities by importance. Once you've answered all the questions, the module will evaluate all the layer weight values, which will be applied to create the results for the restoration dashboard. In the following table, we'll find all of the layers that will be used to compute the restoration dashboard and the associated weights. Users remain in complete control of the software and can manually modify every layer definition. Clicking on the Action button will open a pop-up window displaying a description of the layer and the option to change that layer that will be used for this theme. This layer will be checked for compatibility with the rest of the application. If it's not compatible, the default layer will be used. Once modifications are set, you can click on the Save button or cancel to use the default layer. The recipe section allows a user to load the weights from a previously saved model or use the weights from the questionnaire. Clicking the validation button will display information about the computation to make it clear what information the program is using to run the calculations. The result map below indicates priority areas of restoration based on your specific ranking of restoration objectives, constraints, and risks. Areas in the map in blue indicate a higher return on investment, while areas mapped in red indicate a lower return with regards to your objective. The map could show, for instance, the precise areas where restoring forest would yield the largest potential increases in carbon storage, food positioning, or flood control, relative to the costs and risks. This indicator of restoration potential is prioritized based on your ranking of expected benefits. It represents the ratio of the weighted sum of benefits divided by costs. Costs include both priority and establishment costs. Comparing the relative magnitude of this indicator across space and between sites can help identify which sites offer a high return on investment and which ones offer a low return. Investigate the restoration suitability map to identify some areas that seem promising for planning restoration activities. Once you've identified these regions, you can draw a boundary box around them to run summary statistics for comparison. Presented statistics include a detailed analysis of the estimated benefits, costs, and risks. This information can help you assess trade-offs and restoration priorities between regions of interest.
Forest restoration is complex and requires that decision makers consider a multitude of factors when deciding where to pursue restoration interventions. Decisions include where to restore and which areas hold the highest chances of success. These complex choices require the consideration of a number of biophysical and socioeconomic factors. This tool provides a medium to quantify user priorities and help them better understand how restoration interventions will help achieve their goals.
So that was a quick overview of how the C-Plan restoration planning tool works. As you just saw, you can use this tool to investigate which lands likely have the best return on investment based on your stakeholder priorities and constraints. Using this information, you can examine which areas have high potential to meet different planning objectives. And you can assess alternative options by adjusting the prioritization or the ranking of the suite of social, economic, and environmental benefits. You can also select which considerations you want to consider in your results map. And where you have local data available, you can customize the tool to work with your own data layers. One example we anticipate users will want to customize is working with your national land cover maps. Finally, you can save the results map and the summary of these anticipated benefits and present and communicate these with your community members and other decision makers to give them information on which lands will likely provide the desired benefits with lower costs and risks to implement and maintain these restoration objectives. We hope you have some time to explore the C-Plan tool. And to help you get started in your exploration, we'd like to invite you to join us on the official launch of the C-Plan tool, which will take place on June 16th. And during the launch, you can learn more about how to apply this tool to support your restoration planning efforts.
Thanks so much, Karis, Jeff, Yelena, for the rich presentations and for the very nice overview of the new restoration planning tool. As Karis just mentioned, there will be a more full launch. We didn't have enough time to really dive into some of the details, which I'm sure many of you are interested in hearing about. So please do join on June 16th. I think it'll be another great event and another opportunity to continue to build the momentum after the decade launch. We will now move to the third segment of our event, which is a roundtable discussion between all the panelists. So I'll take the moment just to say a big thank you to all of our speakers for their rich presentations. If you do have questions, we are collecting them in the chat box. I see a few that have already come in, and so we'll do our best to answer some of those. But to get started, I want to turn the floor back to the top of the order and to start with Julian. Julian, once again, a big thanks for your presentation of the FERM tool, the minimum viable product. But I wanted to touch on your work as the coordinator of the task force on monitoring. The monitoring space has gained tremendous momentum with many, the launch of many tools and platforms. In this event alone, we've seen multiple events which have focused on restoration monitoring, one of which you just spoke at as well. So the question is then, how do we harness this really incredible momentum for restoration for the greater good and really to spur collective action, which is really needed to tackle these sort of interconnected and wicked challenges of biodiversity collapse and climate crisis? So over to you.
Thanks, Khalil. Yeah, tough question. No, but a really important question. I mean, it's really critical that we collaborate across institutions, platforms, seeking those synergies between initiatives, avoiding duplication of effort and really moving forward together. I think that's the spirit of the decade. The task force for monitoring was established, I think, for this specific purpose, and I think it's fulfilling its mandate. But we need to work hard to maintain this collaboration, the shared vision that sound monitoring can catalyze investments and ensure those science-based actions which are so necessary. As has been mentioned, the task force undertook a survey of available tools and platforms, and we identified 150 tools and platforms, many also for local level applications. I saw a question on non-satellite based platforms. There's a lot of great platforms for using citizen science and collecting local level information. So there's a lot of movement, innovation in this space. I mean, in the worst case scenario, I think, is that these efforts are sort of disparate, duplicative, and the overall ecosystem becomes quite confusing. So, I mean, one great outcome from this survey was the almost universal agreement to collaborate and sort of integrate. And we see this collaboration with the broad membership of the task force, with 100 organizations. The presentations today, integrating a platform for the Drylands into our overall framework for ecosystem restoration monitoring, and the clear statements from platform developers that we jointly put out today. So yeah, great question, Khalil. We need to really keep working closely together to make sure that we're all collaborating and reducing duplication of effort. So back to you.
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Julian. Yeah, the critical efforts of the task force and really of many of the partners and the partnership through the UN decade to align and try to harness that energy. But it will take an effort to sort of find consensus problem statements and agree on sort of open source validated data sets, really with the end goal of sort of increasing transparency around critical landscapes. And that will be key. That'll be a key lever to move restoration to scale. And to get that started, we'll need buy-in, and we'll need sort of restoration champions, sort of early movers, and that'll be from all sectors, from civil society, the public sector, and the private sector. Fida, I wanted to turn to you next. You gave a nice presentation and provided us with an overview of how the DRIP was being piloted in some countries, countries we could consider early movers or champions of restoration monitoring, you could say. And you provided a nice overview of some of the next steps. So could you share with us a little bit more in detail? What's the current status of that piloting? I know we heard from Zimbabwe, but from some other country examples potentially as well. Where has piloting begun? And from what's been done already, are there any key lessons that you can already draw and share with our participants?
Thank you, Khalil. Exactly as you mentioned, we are aiming to find champions and to have this tool meet the needs on the ground and the needs of the countries and decision makers. We initiated this pilot in 25 countries. 25 countries, out of them, we have 90% countries are on Dryland. So far, we have Zimbabwe, from Africa, Tanzania, Angola, and we have from the Middle East, we have Lebanon, Morocco, and countries from Latin America like Ecuador, part of the Dryland, and in Central Asia as well, like Mongolia, Kazakhstan, and other countries. So basically, we are aiming to have projects that just started and projects that already have implementation on ground and projects with that already finished. So in this case, we are aiming to analyze the different needs of users. But the key lessons learned so far we managed to extract is that most of the users find that DRIP will help them to monitor the progress and will help them to be aligned with their monitoring and evaluation framework of different initiatives. And the most interesting part is what mentioned by Zimbabwe and in Kaysam in Lebanon as well, is that while they are testing or using this registry at this first stage, they managed to recognize different activities and why they didn't invest in X activity to avoid the degradation of some activities in different land uses. And also the way of this registry, because with FERM, it will have more than a dry land ecosystem. So this is very important for the land degradation neutrality in terms of achieving the neutrality and looking into the different land uses to contribute to the restoration. So that's also what most of the users find an added value, is that it's just one-stop shop where we can enter all information, and then by using the DRIP, we can go farther into analysis on the ground that can help them to report into their provide case studies into their PERS report. One last point I want to highlight is that DRIP now is in cooperation with UNCCD, and we're trying to align it with the GeoLDN working group on capacity building related to the integration of FERM DRIP. So this will be also a way to harmonize and synergize such tool with other initiatives. So users, countries, decision makers will not be bothered by using too many platforms to support their decision makers. And of course, it will be aligned with user manuals, training, and over the coming year and up to the next year, we are trying with the 25 countries to strengthen their champion role, to support us linking the cloud with the ground and support their decision-making process.
Yeah, thanks so much, Fida. I think you touched on a very important point, which is reducing the duplication. And I think that was really the ethos of bringing together the DRIP and the FERM. And it's sort of an ethos that the task force, since its inception, has tried to really focus on, is that, we want restoration stakeholders to be able to access the tools that they need that can be most helpful to them. And we're not under any sort of misconceptions. There are going to be different tools that will be useful for each different user. So none of the tools that we're presenting here today are sort of one-stop shops, but we hope that through some of our activities that we can actually link and provide users options to be able to access the range of tools. And so, Julian mentioned this tool survey that we've taken, that we've done with some of the task force members. I'll ask actually Yoshihiko to maybe put that survey into the chat so you all can continue to contribute to that effort. And we are sort of currently in the process of kind of collating that information and trying to find the best way to make it useful for you all sort of through a visual mapping. So that's exciting. But yeah, maybe to follow up on that question to Fida, maybe I can go directly to the source or go directly to our colleague in the country, Benarbas. So Benarbas, in the GLF session these past 2 days and on many of the documents that are written on Drylands, what's clear is that time doesn't appear to be on our side. So restoration is certainly one of the simplest solutions that we can take on board, that we can adapt. But drylands are also increasingly under threat, with sort of 12 million hectares lost per year from degradation and drought. And these numbers are only growing or are only being exacerbated. So in your opinion, and from your country perspective, how do you feel the DRIP and the FERM platform can help to improve dryland restoration outcomes and really help to support Zimbabwe's reporting towards the land degradation targets?
Okay, thank you very much. we think this will help us, to start effective monitoring. Because without such tools, our monitoring was very poor. And as you saw from our case study, when we tested this, we found out that amongst stakeholders and actors who participated in this exercise, you can see development of a sense of ownership and incentive to participate, because people want to see the impact of their sweat or the impact of their efforts. So we feel this is a good start, and also people hearing that they will be able to access tools which will help them to timelessly, see what is happening and perhaps apply adaptive management. So we feel this definitely will be very good even at community levels, where people can tell you that, oh, we can see this is not working. And when you see it together using these tools, we hope this will go a long way in improving even the reporting. Because sometimes people could not report even on impact of activities, especially on SDGs and different reporting platforms. So this, I'm sure, could be very important for the future. We see the future bright.
Thanks so much, Barnabas. No, yeah, that's very critical. I mean, the monitoring effort really provides the evidence and helps to test some of those underlying assumptions, and that adaptive management piece is critical. So thank you for sharing those thoughts, and we look forward to continuing to work with you and your colleagues in Zimbabwe and the other countries who are testing the DRIP to really better understand how the tools can suit your needs. I want to shift to sort of the second group of colleagues who presented about the restoration planning and monitoring tools. And I want to go to Yelena first. Yelena, thanks so much for the rich presentation where you highlighted an exciting number of different monitoring tools and applications across sort of a wide range of ecosystems. So a few sort of bundled questions for you. Maybe a simple one first, but important. As a restoration practitioner, how can I access these tools? If I really want to get my hands on some of them, how can I access them through the FERM? And if you could also speak to a little bit of the level of integration between the FERM and some of those other tools that are in CEPL, and just to make your question even more difficult, maybe you can also highlight a geospatial tool a restoration monitoring tool that isn't geospatial in focus. We had a question in the chat from Lova Rosalinoro. I'm going to apologize for my pronunciation. So a bundle of questions over to you, Yelena.
Thanks, Khalil, so much. And thanks, Lova, also for the question from the audience. So to access tools in the FERM, we have a tab there where a user can go and see tools that are related to ecosystem restoration monitoring. We're working on also creating better linkages to, if those tools have data, to actually visualize that data in the FERM. So those are some linkages that we're actively working on. With CEPL, a concrete linkage that we have between CEPL and the FERM is that you can visualize satellite imagery through the FERM. And we hope to build on these linkages and make it easier for users to visualize their data with the other data that's available in the FERM. So that's something that's coming up and users can look forward to. Then you ask about what are some examples of restoration monitoring that don't use geospatial data. I think that's a great question, because restoration, it happens on the ground, and it usually happens because there are communities, because there are organizations, NGOs, individuals that are there doing that restoration activity. So participation from those communities and individuals is really important, and it doesn't require doing any remote sensing. And there are a variety of ways that they can be monitor and participate in restoration without using satellite data. One example is sharing their practices through platforms like the WOCAT, which is now linked in the FERM. So through the practices tab in each ecosystem, anyone can see technologies or different restoration activities that have been implemented. And other tools and resources are also available for planning and monitoring restoration. For example, the Road to Restoration publication by WRI and FAO is a great resource for participatory restoration indicator planning and reporting and monitoring. And tools such as Regreening Africa by eCraft is great for collecting information on the ground and aggregating it. And with the geospatial information, that really helps us see the big picture. So while monitoring doesn't always require, remote sensing, satellite data, it is good to know where it has happened, so then we can see the bigger picture, exactly like Barnabas says, and learn from what worked or what hasn't worked.
Fantastic.
Thanks,
Lou. So continuing on that thread, I want to stay with our colleagues from the second launchpad, and I want to go to Karis next. My apologies. And I want to highlight, I want to touch on an element that was highlighted a few times by Julian, Fida, and then once again by Barnabas. And this would hold true for all sort of new and novel tools, certainly the three we've heard about today. That sort of, tools developed on their own, and they can sit on a shelf and not be taken up. They cannot be adapted, and it's extremely important that these tools are deployed in a manner where there's engagement, there's sort of co-development with users, and we're getting feedback along the way while they're being developed. And this is also being paired with capacity development. So, Karis, I wanted to actually ask you about the tool. It seems like there are some elements of the tool that sort of come ready to go, that are sort of standard, that are kind of out of the box. But a lot of the value of that tool comes in its possibility to be customized. And obviously that customization would need to come with engagement and with capacity development. So can you elaborate a little bit on how the tool will balances that sort of ready to go versus customization, and any plans for stakeholder engagement?
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, currently, most of the data layers can be switched. So users looking to use the tool can replace those default global data sets with their regionally calibrated information. And like I mentioned a little bit earlier, we anticipate, like most agencies will have national land cover data sets that they want to select to replace the global layers with. Or sometimes there's more spatially explicit, more precise census data that can be used as well. And as those of us that work with data know, there can often be a lot of different data formatting options. So we have the tool set up, to work with these data sets, but users will have to do some pre-processing more than likely to work with these data sets. So right now we're kind of in the data collection phase, our own data collection phase from our users. So we're currently testing the use of these, how different planning communities will use these customization tools, so we can assess those common uses and make sure that we're building in those pre-processing or post-processing support functions within the tool, and allocating our resources to support those most commonly used use cases. So we have a number of focus groups that we're conducting right now, and we're in the planning phase to build out more focus groups and capacity building workshops. So I'll just make the plug for those of you interested in the audience to be involved in this testing phase and to provide us some feedback and ideas. We're definitely interested in hearing and learning from you.
Thanks so much, Karis. And Jeff, you did a very nice job highlighting an overview of the new layers that are included in the tool. You sort of touched on the origin story and how these new sort of socioeconomic layers have been developed to complement the biophysical layers that were in that first paper by Bastien et al. So from your perspective, why is that so critical to the planning phase? And also, in your opinion, what would be the most critical aspect or function of this tool of interest if I was a restoration practitioner or planner?
Thanks for those questions, Khalil. Before I open them, or before I answer them, I would like to underscore what Karis just said about our interest in getting feedback on this presentation. The tool, is getting close to being complete in an initial version, but we do expect to continue to modify it. So we're very interested in getting your feedback and working with you to test run it. Coming to your questions, Khalil, I can give two answers to the first question, which is about why it's critical to consider more than biophysical restoration potential. The first answer is a micro answer. If history is any guide, then the majority of forest restoration will occur on marginal agricultural land. That's land that may have been originally in forest, but it was converted to agriculture at some time in the past, and now it generates a low return from growing crops or raising animals. This land is somebody's land, and if they're going to restore forests on it, then they need to reap benefits that exceed the costs they incur. Knowing where biophysical conditions allow forests to be restored is essential, but it's only a precondition for successful, sustainable restoration. Successful, sustainable restoration must make land users better off, either directly or indirectly. Ensuring that land users come out ahead is especially important in low and middle income countries, where farmers, especially smallholders, typically have low levels of income and land is their most important material asset. So planners need to know where land users will likely benefit from restoration, not only where trees will grow. My second answer to this question is more on the macro side. Forest restoration requires substantial investment. The pandemic has hit budgets of governments and international organizations hard. It's never been more important to use scarce funding that's available for restoration as efficiently as possible. And efficiency means using funds cost effectively, allocating them to the locations and the activities where restoration generates the greatest benefits relative to its costs. Information on biophysical restoration potential really tells us nothing about costs, and it tells us very little about benefits. Incorporating economic information into restoration plans should also assist governments and international agencies in attracting funding from the private sector, which is by far the largest pool of investable capital in the world. Yet a second question, which is about the most critical aspects or functions of C-Plan. I'd emphasize three interrelated features. The first is that users rate the prospective restoration benefits that matter most to them. The second is that they can impose constraints that are related to ecological or socioeconomic risks that concern them. And finally, by combining users' input on benefits and risks with built-in information on restoration costs, the tool generates maps and an economically relevant restoration suitability index. And that enables users to easily see where the return on restoration investments is likely to be the highest. In other words, there's a logic to the structure of the tool. It's not just a random collection of spatial variables that users combine in arbitrary ways.
Sorry, fantastic. Thanks so much, Jeff, for the excellent overview. The tool is certainly exciting, and I'm sure many of our participants are keen to join the full launch event next week. So to round out the panel discussion really briefly, I know we're running a little bit short on time now, but I wanted to give Julian one more question. So Julian, to date, conservation and restoration investments have fallen short of the actions needed to combat the biodiversity and climate crises. This was also mentioned by Tim Christofferson, that investment has been one of the key questions that stakeholders have continuously brought up. So I wanted to pose to you for the final question of the roundtable. While governments and public sector funds play a major catalytic role, we need to spur private sector investment. So the key question is, how can monitoring help lay the groundwork for that vital private sector investment need?
It's a great question, Khalil. I mean, this week, it feels like that private finance for restoration is ready to flow into the landscapes. It's a really exciting moment. But actually, summarized in a nice joint article in Forbes this morning, investors need to see the results of restoration work in an independent, transparent, and comparative way. If we get this right, more private sector actors are likely to feel comfortable investing in restoration as a part of their net zero nature positive activities. And as an example, the Monitoring Task Force is working really closely with 1T.org from the World Economic Forum, who convene these private sector actors for restoration finance to make sure that our restoration monitoring platforms fill this need. We need that private finance to flow into the landscapes and support the the full restoration of these critical drylands that we're discussing today. Back to you, Khalil. I think you're muted, Khalil.
Sorry, Julian, I keep doing that here right at the end. But thanks very much for that response, Julian. Well, we are running a little bit behind time, but colleagues, to sort of round out our session today, I want to turn the floor over to two colleagues who will provide us with some take-home messages. I want to turn the floor first over to Mr. Dominique Lupe, who's the Vice Chairperson of the COFO Working Group on Dryland Forest and Agro-Silvopastoral Systems. And then to round out the whole session, we'll turn to Mr. Baron Orr, who's the lead scientist at UNCCD, who will share with us the relevance of the FERM and DRIP platforms and how they can be valuable to countries. So Dominique, first over to you, and then over to Baron.
Oui, bonjour à toutes et à tous. J'ai commencé ma carrière de forestier il y a 46 ans au Burkina Faso, où pour la FAO, j'ai reboisé 600 hectares près de Bobo-Dioulasso. Ensuite, je suis devenu un chercheur de terrain et c'est au Niger que j'ai appréhendé les limites biologiques de la végétation des zones sèches. Au cours de ma carrière assez longue, j'ai vu réaliser de nombreux projets, apparaître beaucoup d'initiatives géniales, mais beaucoup n'ont pas donné les résultats escomptés. D'une part, parce que toute action avec des arbres est une action à long terme, alors que les projets sont à court terme, ce qui a fait que de nombreux projets ont échoué faute de suivi. D'autre part, parce que l'on publie ses succès à court terme, ce qui est souvent le cas après 3 à 5 ans, mais que l'on oublie ensuite de publier les déconvenus qui ont suivi. C'est ainsi que de nouveaux projets refont les mêmes erreurs, au moins pendant un certain temps. Pour ces deux raisons, des sommes considérables d'argent ont été dépensées en pure perte et le manque d'informations fiables n'en est pas la moindre des causes. De nombreuses initiatives de suivi de l'évolution de la végétation existent. Ils sont d'une très grande utilité pour comprendre ce qui est en train de se passer et pour prendre des décisions en conséquence, mais ils n'apportent pas de solution. C'est ici que DRIP, la plateforme des initiatives de restauration des zones sèches, a toute sa place. Elle s'adresse aux praticiens, aux gestionnaires de projets, aux décideurs politiques et aux autres parties prenantes, dont les bailleurs de fonds, dans le but de mieux gérer les paysages des zones sèches en facilitant la communication entre tous ces acteurs. L'échange de connaissances est en effet une des clés majeures du progrès. Cette plateforme DRIP s'adresse aux zones sèches pour lesquelles le couvert forestier, les arbres et l'agroforesterie sont essentiels au bien-être des populations. Elle est structurée autour de la conception, de la mise en œuvre et de l'achèvement des projets de restauration des paysages dans les zones arides et permet aux acteurs de rendre compte de leur avancement. Les données ainsi récoltées permettront de mieux concevoir de nouveaux projets et d'augmenter leurs chances de réussite. DRIP permet également d'agréger les données au niveau national afin de fournir une vue d'ensemble des activités de restauration des paysages et de leur contribution aux objectifs de neutralité en matière de dégradation des terres. En cela, la plateforme est un outil utile d'appui au gouvernement et au sein du comité des forêts de la FAO, le groupe de travail sur les forêts des zones arides et les systèmes agro-silvopastoraux en recommande l'utilisation, notamment pour le suivi régulier de l'évolution des initiatives et la simplification de l'élaboration des rapports, dont celui pour la Convention des Nations Unies pour la lutte contre la désertification. La plateforme de suivi des initiatives de restauration des zones arides collaborera étroitement avec l'organe de suivi de la restauration des écosystèmes, FERM, dont on vient de parler, la base de données mondiale sur la gestion des terres, WOCAT, et le système pour l'accès, le traitement et l'analyse des données pour la surveillance des terres, CEPAL. Tout ceci afin d'être plus performant et surtout pour que DRIP soit largement utilisé pour l'amélioration des conditions environnementales et des conditions de vie dans les zones sèches. Un réel impact sera obtenu sur les terrains si les décideurs prennent les bonnes décisions grâce aux bonnes informations. Or, malgré leur importance, les données statistiques et les résultats de la recherche restent inaccessibles à la majorité des personnes. Grâce à DRIP et à la diversité des informations qui vont remonter de nombreux terrains de zones sèches, le groupe de travail pourra aider les pays à utiliser ces informations afin de mettre en place des actions visant à stopper la dégradation des terres dans les zones sèches, puis à restaurer leurs paysages. Je vous remercie de votre attention.
Thanks very much, Dominique, and we'll go directly to Dr. Baron Orr for the final remarks.
Not able to start the camera, but I'll go ahead. Greetings from Bonn, Germany. And I guess what I love about how, okay, let's see.
There we go. We've got you on camera now. Oh,
All right, thank you. So I just want to say what I love about how FAO and 99 other organizations have approached monitoring for the UN decade on ecosystem restoration can be captured in just a few words: common goal, harmonization, interoperability, teamwork, and finally, relevance. Relevance for the entire globe, relevance for each of the 1 billion hectares countries have committed to restoration to date. Relevance to the ministers, to the land use planners, to the land managers working to turn those commitments into action. The UNCCD is 196 individual countries working together to tell the national to global story about land degradation through national reporting via a platform called Praise4. Countries can also tell the national to local story about the measures they are taking on the ground through FERM and tools like DRIP, CPOL, and CPLAN. And this comes full circle because the developers of those tools are working to ensure that countries can optimize the where of their interventions through assessment of restoration potential and integrated landscape assessment, and by ensuring project data is fully aligned with LDN and UNCCD national reporting requirements. With 127 countries pursuing LDN targets on 450 million of those billion hectares, the open source, open access nature of FERM and DRIP, CPOL, and CPLAN will mean that any country can apply what is nationally or locally relevant for more sustainable, nature-positive land use decisions and more sustainable production systems, thereby contributing to the LDN targets. The unprecedented teamwork, harmonization, interoperability is dramatically increasing the relevance of what is being reported at local, national, and global levels, while simultaneously decreasing the overall burden countries face in environmental monitoring. As the UN decade is launched, let's do all we can to embrace this model of cooperation and collaboration. We have the commitments from the countries. We have the data and the tools. It's time to roll up our sleeves and get to work. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Baron. Wonderful, wonderful final remarks and inspiring call to action. Time to roll up our sleeves and get to work. And I think we can leave everyone with that strong message. So with that, I'd like to say a big thank you to all of our speakers, all of our panelists who took the time to join us today. Of course, a very big thanks to all of you for sticking around. And of course, this week is just getting started. So we hope you continue to engage in the rich discussions here on the number of partner events that are taking place. It's such an exciting time, so let's continue to build the momentum. And of course, we invite you to join us for the official decade launch on June 5th. We will see you then. That's all from our side. Take care, everyone.